Hi, I'm Nick Haig, and welcome to the World's Greatest Business Thinkers podcast. Netta Jenkins is on a mission to change the world as we know it. She's an acclaimed author with a transformational best-selling book titled The Inclusive Organization. Netta has a deep background in communications, leadership, and behavioral psychology, and has been advising companies and diverse audiences for over 15 years. She's been featured in Forbes, Business Insider, and on CNN, to name just a few, and was named as one of the top 10 most influential Black women in business to follow. She's CEO of Aerodai, an AI-powered inclusion employee performance platform, and also serves as an advisory board member for Betterment, an online investment company. If that wasn't enough, Netta is currently working with Mark Law, former CEO of Walmart, to build the most inclusive city in America, the first new city to be built in the United States in over a century. Welcome to the World's Greatest Business Thinkers podcast, Netta.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be on.
Well, I'm so excited because the first thing I've got to say is, wow, Netta, you are really making a big impact on this world. We're going to get into all that detail today. But first, as always, I'd like to start by you giving our listeners just some background to who Netta Jenkins is. In my introduction, I mentioned that you're CEO of Aerodei and have been named one of the top 10 most influential Black women in business today. But it would be great if you can start by telling us about your journey in business so far.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for this question. Goodness, where do I even begin? My background is in behavioral psychology and communication. So I've always been really interested in human behavior. Why do we respond the way in which we do? How do we react to things, right? And can we actually shift our behaviors, and how long does that actually take?
Yeah.
So went to school and focused on that. And, I've always just been so embedded in the business space. And that's me watching my mom as, a little girl. So both of my parents immigrated to the US from Liberia in the 80s. And, we experience, I watched my mom being pretty successful, financially successful, but I also experienced the other spectrum of us not having much. And I remember, those times when there were no light or gas or heat or even barely any little, food. I watched my mom innovate, and I watched her create things that she really didn't even have the resources to create, but she would create it. I also watched her open up her first clothing boutique. And so again, as a young person, I watched her being an entrepreneur. I watched her really creating that shift and creating those experiences for people that were coming into her store. And so that's where the beginning of business started for me. And then I had gotten, after college, I had landed into the corporate space. And I remember just seeing all of the various barriers and gaps that had existed. And I wanted to do something about it. It was, again, that innovative approach. And what I did was, having that business knowledge and understanding that, I applied it within, corporations. And that, of course, led into my own my own business eventually. But that was the start of it.
Yeah. Well, and I think, you talk of your mum in the book, in a fair few chapters, and she, those values that she's instilled in you, both from a hardworking, but, giving a go, those entrepreneurial spirit, she really did have a massive impact
Yeah,
on your life.
absolutely.
That came through in spades. So I think, talking about your book in particular, The Inclusive Organization, it was published last year, and immediately was listed in Forbes as the top DEI read, diversity, equity, and inclusion. I suppose I should spell that out if anyone didn't know that. But the book starts reminiscing about your happy childhood growing up in Rhode Island until one day you moved house when you were 7 years old, and this innocent view on the world was changed forever, where you were in the garden with your mum. And this incident really did shape the rest of your life and career. Can you tell us about that incident?
Yeah, absolutely. To your point, it definitely shifted the way that I looked and I viewed the world entirely in that moment. But I was in the yard with my mom, and there was a white woman that had walked up to us and said, she proclaimed, "Blacks don't belong in my neighborhood," and then she proceeded to spit in my mother's face. And I remember feeling all of the ways that my mom felt in that very moment. I could feel her thinking, well, how do I react? And we all know about what that reaction could be as a human, right? But
Absolutely.
also her thinking, okay, well, I'm an immigrant to this country. And if I react in that way, well, then what happens to me? Will I even be believed? So all of these things are going through her mind. And as a 7-year old right next to her, I was silent. I didn't move until my mom grabbed my hand. We turned around, we just walked back into the house, and we never really unpacked it when I was younger. And I remember going into my room and I got down my knees and I vowed to never be silent again. And I tell you, that's when the advocate within me erupted. Right. I went back into school and I knew I was running for some office, right? Maybe not for the US government, but for middle school. I went and I said, I'm going to be the president of the freshman class once I graduate out of 8th grade and going to high school. And that's exactly what I did. And for me, it was more about how do I educate people within the school? Like, I never want to experience that again. How do I make sure that I bring these experiences to life for those that may not be able to experience what I had?
Yeah.
And that is really what drew me into the work that I do today.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's another incident you talk about in the book, but your mother, I suppose, as any mother is, was a massive influence on you. But I love what she said to you when you got home on the second incident where a young white boy singled you out at the bus stop and racially abused
Mhm.
you. But she said, "I didn't bring you into this world to cry about it. I brought you into this world to create change."
Yeah.
Such powerful words, and words that you've used. You've not looked back. You've used them to set the course for the work that you do now. So it's
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there were so many moments where my mother, had those prominent messages. They were like little clips
yeah,
that just stuck in my mind, and it really influenced, it has influenced everything that I've done and that I continue to do. So I'm really thankful for that. And when I look at that, that in itself is privilege, right? I always say that um, all of us as human beings, we have to identify, okay, what are the privileges that we have, and how do we then share them with others?
yeah,
Like, that's inclusion, identifying the privileges that we hold. And that's one of the things, like, just even having parents, both of my parents are African. So it's, you can be a doctor, lawyer, engineer. And if you're not one of those three, then you haven't done anything in life, right? So
yeah,
there was always that pressure. Education was always at the forefront. Being bold was okay as well,
yeah,
and nurtured, and so that's helped me tremendously.
yeah. Well, and just before we get into the book, I think it's probably worthwhile us touching on this sometimes misconception of what DEI is. It's sometimes that people perceive it to be solely based on race and gender, and these are obviously components, but it's much larger than that, isn't it? How do you view DEI?
Yeah, I always say DEI is really this holistic approach to understanding how we as human beings behave, and how do we then pour back into each other. Now, when we understand it just from that foundational point, and we're trying to understand each other, then we have to then see the barriers that may exist for each other, right? And that's when we start breaking it down, whether it be by race, gender, ability. But at a foundational level, it's how do we identify who we are and how do we pour back into each other? And so it's, and that's one of the points that I brought in my book. It's interesting because when I speak with a lot of managers or even executives, the number one thing they say is they go to, well, oh yeah, we have to recruit, more. And of course, yeah, you want to increase representation, but if you haven't even within your organization understood who those employees are, what they're bringing in, like what baggage do they bring into the workplace that could disrupt and not allow them to actually progress, and have the highest level of productivity, then you're losing out, as a leader, as an organization. And so that's how come I when folks, when we talk about the misconceptions, I always try to outline what that foundational level needs to look like.
Yeah, yeah. The first chapter of your book, it's called Decoding Human Behaviour, and it takes the reader through a history of race and shows that some of the horrific events of the past, like slavery, the Holocaust, might not be as behind us as many would like us to believe. And in this section, you talk about the Great Divergence. What is this, and do you feel it's been amplified since COVID?
Yeah, I mean, just to simplify it, the Great Divergence is really split into two. There's a population of people that feel that everything, like things have gotten better. Right? Like, why do we even need DEI? Why are we having these conversations? We don't have slavery anymore, right? People are not in that type of pain. And
Yeah,
then there's the other population that are experiencing these inequities and barriers daily, and so they are the ones that are advocating and fighting for. And so, and that's how come I don't even break it down by race or gender or anything. It's really split into two groups of people that care about it or just don't. And I
yeah,
call it the Great Divergence because until both groups can really unite to understand, okay, what are the complexities, what are the implications here? How do we move the needle forward together, even if I'm feeling like, well, I haven't experienced this. Is this true? But I'm feeling, well, we had in the US a black president. Things must be better, right?
yeah,
Um, for us to really engage with each other is the key element, and then action is the most important, of course.
yeah. Yeah, and I think, as you say again in the book, the starting
Yeah.
point is to listen to people, learn who they
Yeah.
are, what motivates them, what scares them, what makes them feel connected, and in doing so, this will bridge the great divergence. But we need to start doing things differently. That's for sure.
Right.
Um,
And it's
in,
it's just, I always say it's very interesting. Even this weekend, I had moderated a conference, and they're insurance regulators, and folks are just so used to doing things the way that they do. So no one's smiling and everyone's really serious. And I'm like, well, if we can't even engage with each other as humans and we're so caught up in our titles or
yeah,
the roles that we're in and the functions that we're in, we'll never be able to get to the next level to actually tackle the work that we need to do around diversity, equity, and inclusion.
yeah,
Right. So, how do we even begin just like talking, like breaking some of those walls down and the covering that many of us do, and start having just mini conversations?
yeah, yeah.
That
I
doesn't even happen.
I think I saw that on your LinkedIn feed where you come in dancing with music.
I came in dancing. I'm like, I'm going to just be in my own world.
Loved it. I mean, I loved it, but like you say, that everyone was very straight laced, and there was there. They didn't know how to take it. It's like, come on,
Right.
let's have some fun.
Right.
Let's speak
Right,
to one another.
exactly. And it
Yeah,
allowed them to get to know each other. It then
yeah,
allowed for an open dialogue about how 50% of the workforce will be retiring, and how it's so important to then appeal to various demographics and what that means in those communities. And are they even aware of that?
yeah,
Right. And
yeah,
so it was interesting, but it starts off with us breaking down those walls.
yeah. And doing things differently. And I think a great
Absolutely.
example of that in the book is Alexis Ohanian, co-founder of Reddit, husband to Serena Williams. But what he did when he resigned from his role as Reddit board member after 15 years,
Mhm.
I think it's, can you expand on this story to show that actions are definitely more powerful than words?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what Alex said was really, really powerful. And this was, around the time of the murder of Mr. George Floyd. Many organizations were working on what their action plans would be as it pertains to diversity, equity, inclusion, and anti racism. But also, many organizations started to identify the lack of board representation, not just the lack of representation of workers within the organization, but the board that are core stakeholders, right? And they're making those hard calls and decisions. And so he was very intentional about saying, well, how do I remove myself to provide more space for new perspectives and identifying we don't have a diverse board here. So there are individuals that are qualified because it's not just about sticking anyone into a role and saying, well, we just want you in there just because of your race or your gender or your ability. It's about really being intentional and saying, well, this individual is qualified, but why haven't they been considered? And so Alex did that questioning, and he made sure to bring a black identifying person into the board role to replace him that was qualified to do the work, but just had not been given the opportunity to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's such a powerful example of how
Yeah,
companies can demonstrate their commitment to equity, inclusivity, but especially from the top down, as you say, from the C suite and down there. And you talk about this in the section also diversity recruiting. So that there's lots of examples within the book around this.
exactly, yeah.
I
And just to build on that a little bit, again, what he did is he had to explore who he is and the role that he has played and what hasn't he seen, right? Why was he sitting in this role and there wasn't that board representation? And that's not an easy thing to do.
Yeah.
It's not an
Yeah.
easy thing for any of us to do, right? To identify the privileges and then say, okay, well, now I'm going to take my privilege and present that power to someone else.
Yeah.
That's something that we all can work on.
Absolutely. I used to work for Dentsu, who are a global Japanese media company, and they bought my market research business that I sold to them in 2018. But
Congratulations.
D,
That's awesome.
DEI, sorry, Netta.
Yeah, no, I said congratulations. That's awesome.
No, well, it's. I mean, it was a. It was a big decision, because it's your baby that you nurture from the early years. But I felt it was the good next step in order to, because they gave us global reach and we were able to do more. We were able to advance our IT systems and everything else
Mhm.
as well. But it was quite a journey that we went on. And DEI is central to Dentsu's vision. And I remember being impressed that they were so people centered, that they offered equal opportunities for everyone, regardless of race, gender, sexual orientation, age, or disability.
Yeah.
And we were obviously speaking to other organisations, but nobody was really talking the same story as Dentsu. And so I knew it was the right fit for me and the rest of my colleagues. And I mention this because I think it is such an important differentiator in making a brand stand out. It's not just about doing the right thing. It's about, does it make an impact in business?
Mhm.
And everyone's talking about ROI all the time. But actually, when we look at DI, it really does make an impact in business, doesn't it?
Mhm. Yeah. Absolutely. And I mean, it makes an impact on so many levels. I always like to take it from, I always like to start up from the human level. Within any organization, you have employees. And if you're not pouring into those employees, identifying and understanding what's going to motivate them to take it to the next level, it's going to be very difficult. But really, also identifying one example is, well, who are the caregivers within your organization, right? What does the flexibility look like for them? Oftentimes, caregivers are set up for failure. You drop your child off, let's say, to school at 8 a.m., but you have a meeting at 8 a.m. or 8:30. So now you're rushing and now you have a lot of stress. Now you get into that meeting and you're not as focused. You're not as productive, right? And so again, when we're talking about DEI, a lot of organizations don't take a look at, well, how are we even able to retain the talent here? There's a lot of turnover within organizations, right? But they don't identify the amount of money that they're losing out on. The other thing that has been really interesting is a lot of organizations focus on RFPs. Many RFPs want to know, okay, what are some of those inclusive actions that are being taken? What has the impact been? It's not enough for an organization to say, well, we have employee resource groups, right? We put it back on our groups to do the work.
Yeah.
It has to be more than that. It's how are we measuring the impact of inclusive actions across the organization, many organizations can't really provide those data points. And so now if you have an RFP that's asking that, and you can't put in that information, well, another organization that's actually doing the work is going to end up winning that RFP. I've seen that in real time with an organization that ended up winning $8 million, right?
Yeah.
As opposed to their competitors. So there's even new customer acquisition. We look across the board now at for all generations. Folks are really interested in understanding, well, how are we looking at the social impact? How are we looking at the social lens? Again, if organizations are not in tune with that, you're losing out. You may lose out on getting those new customers and making those relationships or retaining those new customers. So there's a lot of different elements that are not being looked at um, from a talent perspective and financially as well.
Yeah, yeah, and I think for the YouTube watchers, they can see your book behind me. There's also Tiffany Bover's book, which is the experience mindset. I'm speaking to her in a couple of weeks'
I
time
love
about
that.
some research in her latest book. But she's carried out robust research backed by Salesforce to quantify the financial impact of an engaged workforce. So I think it ties very neatly into some of that you're just talking about there, Netta, and so stay tuned if that's of interest to you. But like you say, there's so much money. I think that when I was doing some research on this, was it $8 billion per year on inclusion training, but
Oh yeah.
95% of employees still don't know what to do or how to drive these efforts
Hmm.
forward. So I think from a research background where I come from, over the years, it starts with maybe listening, hearing back, some of the problems that sit within an organization. Are employee engagement surveys the starting point for anyone out there that's looking to sense check how their company's doing specific to DEI initiatives? And are there any challenges that they should be wary of when looking at this data?
Yeah, for employee surveys, I'll say
Yeah,
that, gosh, there's so many different elements. There's a lack of trust, right? But I was looking at the data. 50% of employees believe that their feedback and engagement surveys will not lead to meaningful change,
yeah,
and it contributes to reluctance to provide that honest feedback within an engagement survey. Oftentimes, even within an engagement survey, folks are just kind of clumped together, and it's like, hey, 95% of our organization feels like it's inclusive. Okay, well, so let's break it down by demographic, or let's break it down by race and ethnicity.
yeah,
But 95% of the organization is white identifying, or maybe male identifying, or right. So there are all of these different components that are just not factored, right, when it comes to employee engagement surveys. There was some other research, actually, a survey by Gartner that found 45% of employees fear retaliation for providing negative feedback, right? Leading them to either skip surveys or provide overly positive responses. I've seen that within organizations time and time again, where employees that trusted me said, hey, I just said whatever I need to say. I just checked yes to everything. And then you're not really getting those real responses. So, one of the things that I've been encouraging organizations to do is, bring in an outside person, but have those focus group type of surveys, right? Where it's live, but there has to be someone within that room that folks trust,
yeah,
right? That will allow them to speak about, okay, here's what's happening within the organization. You want my insights. Now, how will you go about implementing it? People want to know, I'm not going to just give you feedback to give you feedback. I want to see that it's going to be implemented. And what's that time frame? So I think organizations just have to set it up a little bit better, have it more intimate, have focus groups. And yes, it does take more time, but it allows to really understand the various demographics within an organization and what's truly happening and what's needed
yeah,
to shift that culture a bit to be more
yeah.
positive.
B2B Frameworks is a curated collection of proven business frameworks to develop your strategic thinking skills, solve your biggest business problems, and unlock your next promotion. Our mission is to help you achieve these goals. We want to create the next generation of successful business leaders by providing the tools and frameworks needed to create effective strategies that drive business growth. Each framework comes with a downloadable set of instructions with large, colourful diagrams and editable templates to guide you through the process step by step and prompt you to consider the problem from every possible angle. Along with audio guides and educational tools, our extensive content library is full of real-world examples and case studies of strategic thinking in action. So why learn with B2B frameworks? We've carefully curated only the most effective, proven business and marketing frameworks. Our downloadable materials and audio guides will help you easily apply each framework. And the insights and advice you'll find across the site are based on 30 years of consulting experience from one of the world's leading business strategy experts, Paul Haig. B2B Frameworks is a small investment to advance your career or grow your business. Start your journey to becoming a successful business leader by joining B2B Frameworks today. Yeah, and I think you mentioned focus groups there. I mean, I've carried out hundreds, if not thousands, over the 25 years of being a researcher. But I think it's so important from an employee standpoint, being face to face, being open with questions, but making sure that there is this, offering psychological safety, if you like, so that people do feel like they can be upfront and truthful, because that honest and truthful feedback, no one's going to action anything that's of any use if people are just guarded and just ticking yes for the fact that they don't believe that they will be anonymous at the end of the survey itself.
Right. Absolutely.
This podcast is sponsored by B2B Frameworks, and you've devised your own DEI framework to help not only implement change but also deliver impactful long-term results that has been shown to impact organizational profit. Everyone's heard of the 4 Ps, but your framework is the 3 Ps. Can you expand on this framework and how it's used in the workplace today?
Yeah. So the 3 Ps is something that, is near and dear to me because I watched it work time and time again across various organizations and industries. But the first P is people. Again, it goes back to that human behavior of understanding, okay, what's the demographic within this organization? What are some of the experiences that they're having? What are those benefits that are needed? Who's the talent? If we understand our demographic here and we understand the gaps maybe that exist, well, then who do we have to actually attract and how do we attract that talent, right? Yeah. How do we uniquely position ourselves? One of the things that I always say is organizations, they'll talk about, hey, we have this benefit, we have this caregiving benefit. It's amazing. But you never hear about who actually is using that benefit, right? Yeah. And so there's a way, even within for the people framework segment, to be able to market, okay, here are the members within our communities that are using this caregiver benefit, and here is how it's impacted them. And whether it be through a video that's on our website, but now that targets that demographic, maybe that an organization is looking to attract. Then the retention piece, that's also within people as well. The next is process, right? It's how are we looking at learning and development? How often is it embedded in every single thing that's being done within an organization? So for instance, let's say if an organization has an intro to a DEI training or a microaggression training, well, then you want to make sure that every single new joiner that's entering the organization is onboarded with that training. Like they're equipped with those tools to understand foundationally, this is what a microaggression is. Here's how it impacts people. And here's the difference between a microaggressive experience and a non-inclusive experience.
Yeah.
Right. So that process is critical, and process within process are those policies. What happens if someone is microaggressing someone within an organization, right? What is the stance of the organization? So folks want that protection. And then the last piece is product. And that's where the financial layer comes into play, because organizations can look at product in two ways. They can look at product from the point of their product, like, is it inclusive? Is it attracting new customer acquisition? And they can also look at product and say, okay, well, we have, and I'll provide an example. When I was working for a fintech organization, I had, because they focus on codeless architecture, I went ahead and I developed a platform on top of their platform. It wasn't my job to do, but it ended up being a good success story. I know we'll talk about in just a second. But I ended up developing that platform, and that a platform allowed me to take those insights, plug it into an RFP in order for them to win an $8 million RFP deal.
Wow.
That was major, right? It also, the platform also gave us an opportunity to attract new customer acquisition, because now we're having conversations with, KPMG or EY, and we're sharing, hey, here's the platform that we have that could actually service some of the clients that you all support.
Yeah.
So it totally reshifted the focus, the area of focus for the organization that they did not think about in that way. And again, it was also because they brought in someone that had a total different perspective. Like, my mindset is, I don't like just thinking the same old way everyone else wants to think. It's, let's disrupt. And
Yeah.
let's think about how we can utilize that even within, like the technology space that I was in at that time.
Well, that's a really nice segue into my following question, because not only you've created this framework that people can use, but you develop this online platform. It leverages AI. It helps companies with workplace experience. You've called it or branded it Aerodai.
Mhm.
What does it do? Can you tell our listeners more about this platform itself?
Yeah, absolutely. So, one of the organizations I was working in before I got into the fintech organization, I remember asking myself, Netta, if you left this organization today, would this work still continue? That was a very hard thing to answer, because I'm like, oh, of course it would. But how would I be able to tell without a technology or a platform and data points and insights, right? It would
Yeah.
just all be hearsay. And so that's actually what made me join the fintech organization. I was looking for an organization that was building their own technology, and I could just build on top and test it out. And the employees are within the organization, right? Do it without permission, and hopefully I don't get fired. But it started off there. And a major gap that I saw, I always say that there's three populations within an organization. There are your inclusion enthusiasts. So those are folks like you and me that really care about people. We want to see that those barriers are eliminated or mitigated. And so whether you're paying us or not, we're going to talk about it, we're going to advocate, and we're going to action on it. You also have then executives, and they care about the business impact, the financial success. Like, we want
Yeah.
to continue scaling and growing, and yeah, that sounds all good, but how does this pour right back into the business financially? So I also had to think about, how do I appeal to that group as well? And then your third group, you have the naysayers. We don't care. This is not needed. It doesn't affect me. Don't want to hear it, right?
Yeah.
Um, and I had to also think about, well, how do I even appeal to that group? And so the three elements was, I need to connect business impact so that senior executives can see within the platform how it's driving perhaps new customer acquisition, how it's driving retention, how it's driving perhaps maybe RFPs, whatever that business, whatever as an organization they were focused on from a business impact standpoint. Um, the inclusion enthusiast group, it's, we want to see the impact of our efforts in real time. So if I do something, and that's how we all are as humans,
Yeah.
think about it like a relationship. You're courting that person, you're taking them to dinner, or you're having a great time. You want to see some type of impact. Hey, what's going on here, right? I'm doing all these great things. And so the platform is able to show inclusion enthusiasts, okay, based on some of the actions that you've taken, check it out here. Here's what has happened to those around you, or some of the barriers and some of the things that are transpiring. And then the naysayers, I grab them in through gamification. So, in order for you to gain points, you have to take an action. Now, if you're someone that's a gamer and you want your points because you can get some type of prize, you're going to continue to do it. But what's going to happen is over time, your behavior is going to begin to shift because you're going to start to see the impact that you're having on those around you. And then you're going to start to understand the work. And so, Aerodai is about quantifying inclusive actions and aligning them to business impact.
It sounds fantastic, and I think that gamification piece is so important, like you say, especially
Yeah.
for those naysayers, that to make sure that they're starting to take part and they can actually then start to see benefit and change on the back of some of the actions that they're taking, or some of the the questions that they're answering. So I
Yeah.
think that's fantastic. And there's not only that. So we talked about the book, we talked about the company, but if that wasn't enough, you're now working with Mark Law, former CEO of Walmart, to build the most inclusive city in America.
Yeah.
This new city, it's going to be called Tolosa,
Mhm.
and be the first new city to be built in the US for over a century. So tell us more about that.
Yeah, it's definitely an exciting project for sure. Exciting people to work with because they're so provocative in the way that they think, right? And they're super innovative. But a new city in America hasn't been built in over 100 years, and so this is really a groundbreaking moment to do that. But what Mark wants to do is really ensure that it's an equitable, diverse, thriving, innovative community of people,
Yeah.
where it's a community where people feel the deepest sense of belonging, and they feel this level of support and the resources as well, and also a city that's sustainable, right? And even sustainable in the respect of um, um, the way that we navigate from driving, the less pollution to the air. And so, like, there's so many new dynamic things that we're thinking through and trying to partner with various organizations on. But it's definitely an exciting project for sure.
And is that when's that going to come to fruition, or when do you think the first build will start?
Yeah, the first build, the first iteration. So their goal is, they're working nice and slow. They're kind of taking their time to really do this the right way. I know that they have a target year, but I think they're really just trying to pace themselves to ensure that they're reaching out to various demographics.
Yeah.
I think initially it was like, hey, we want to get this off the ground immediately, but they really wanted to take a step back to identify and speak to various populations to ensure that they're aware of the city, and it doesn't become this city where it's just of a certain population, but it's really everyone involved. So really, they're in the stages of identifying and promoting and marketing.
Well, I think what an exciting project. Who doesn't want to live in a place that,
I know.
open, fair, inclusive, welcoming
Yeah.
to all people, no matter what race, ethnicity, or age? I'm sure when it does start happening, then you'll be inundated with people wanting to be residents there.
Exactly. Yes, definitely.
You've set up your own business. You help other organisations with their DEI initiatives, and so I'm sure you lean a lot on business frameworks to help implement change. Putting your own 3Ps business framework to one side, what's your favourite business framework and why?
Yeah. So I this question's a good one because I wouldn't say that there's one business framework that, I stick with. I am a creator, so I'm always trying to create new frameworks
Yeah,
to follow just because many of the frameworks that have been around for such a long time that organizations love to use, I haven't seen drive this significant impact from a diversity scale, like really speaking to everyone. And so that's how come I like to play around with, various frameworks. But it's hard to give one.
Yeah. Well, and I think, like you say, it's. I know when we were analysing data, it was always good to come up with your own framework, and just a simple two by two. Having a look at two different axes and
Exactly.
seeing where data ends up can actually be really powerful when looking at how to dissect the data and how to deliver different actions based on what's coming out of those four different quadrants.
Exactly. Absolutely agree.
Okay, Netta, we've talked about a lot of things there. So to bring things to a close, just a quick fire round of questions I ask all my guests. I love books. To start with, just what are you reading at the moment?
Oh my goodness. So, there's not one book that I'm reading. It's always like a number of things that I'm reading. I will say I'm an avid article reader. So I'm always reading, Harvard Business Review,
Yeah,
Forbes. There is an incredible writer that I love following. Her name is Dr. Janice Gasm. Her articles are always on point. I love articles that I can read that are very timely,
yeah,
that can share, hey, what's happening in the world today? What's this kind of new perspective? And it makes me think about how do I need to apply myself and and advocate in that way. So I'll say I'm more of an avid article reader more than anything, and that's my focus right now.
Well, I'm with you on that. And actually, I know at appraisal time, I always used to, persuade and encourage execs to go off and read, whether it was Harvard Business Review or any
Yeah.
other articles, because there's so much good content out there that's been
So,
created all the time. So,
yeah,
digitally stay on top of that, even if you're not getting the paper version sent through anymore.
absolutely.
We talked about your book, The Inclusive Organization. What's the best business book that you recommend our listeners to read?
Yeah. There's a book by Minda Harts. She is an incredible author, and it's called, goodness, I'm like blanking right now, but A Seat at the Table. It's
Right.
called A Seat at the Table. And I think that's such a great book because it really outlines some of the experiences that Black women have, and how to then navigate. And I think it's a really good book for leaders to understand because it gives them this in on those experiences that perhaps maybe they're not as comfortable, asking someone
Yeah.
about.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it provides them with the tools and the tips as well.
Well, I haven't heard of that book, so I'll search that one out then. Thanks for the recommendation.
Yes, absolutely.
What's the best piece of business advice you've ever been given?
This is a good one. The best piece of business advice has been, um, be slow to speak and quick to listen.
I like that. I like that.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah,
we talked a lot today about listening, haven't we? And understanding first
right. No,
before.
that it's really helped me even within meetings, especially with executives. You get to really understand who an individual is when you're just listening, and then you can ask the right questions to apply. So that
Yeah.
has been dear and near to me.
Yeah. As a researcher, again, I do I reflect very much on that, and a good piece of advice. Which business leader do you most admire, and why?
Oh, I would have to say, both CEOs that I used to work for. So the fintech organization, Gary Hoberman, an incredible leader. He's, the CEO that had identified, hey, you built something beautiful and I want to go ahead and invest in it. And it's an Aerodai is my own today. So it takes a leader to say, hey, no, you're a leader, you're a future leader, and spread your wings. Because I
Yeah.
was just an employee at his organization at a VP level. And the former CEO I worked for, Tim Allen, incredible person. I mean, he was one of those leaders or CEOs, I should say, that invested in my development. Again, saw something special, really took the time to learn about my experience, learn about my background, understand, okay, here are the things that you can improve upon, and I'm willing to invest for you to really expand. And that helped me tremendously. Along with the manager that I had, Deb Joseph, who was and who is still incredibly important in my life. And I always say, the best leaders are those that follow you no matter what. I've left her team a long, long time ago, but she's still that person that will call me and say, okay, how are your kids doing? How
Yeah.
can I support you? And so I would have to say those three people have been instrumental.
Yeah, it's not just a workplace relationship. It's broad.
Exactly.
It's bigger than that. It's deeper than that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Finally, who would you like me to reach out to and invite to come on this podcast in the future?
Yeah, I would say Dr. Janice Gasm. Sorry, she is such a force. She's a writer for Forbes. She has a couple books out as well, an author, and just a wealth of knowledge.
Well, I might need your
I
intro
got
there,
you.
Netta, but I would love to have her on the show. So thanks for
Awesome,
the recommendation there. And
awesome.
thanks so much for joining me today and talking about this crucial topic. Having built my company up from scratch, but also working with some of the world's largest companies carrying out their employee engagement programs, I know firsthand the importance that diversity plays in a company's overall success. It's
Yes,
it's essential to every organization, and getting it right requires this thoughtful, strategic plan that's implemented from the top down. And your book, Netta, will handhold anyone step by step through the way to developing and executing a meaningful DEI program. So, if anyone has any questions about what we've discussed today, about the book, how should they get in touch?
yeah. Please feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. I am always on LinkedIn. You can also send me a LinkedIn email message. Also, email me. Please feel free to email me at netta@nettajenkins.com, or you can head to my website, aerodai.com. So that's AERODEI.com, or nettajenkins.com. So there's many ways to contact me.
Multiple ways, multiple ways. Well, thanks for joining me, and good luck. Good luck with the book, but especially the development of Telosa. I'll definitely be keeping a watchful eye on that to see how it develops.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Netta. This podcast has been brought to you in partnership with Awards International. Awards International is dedicated to running successful business awards programs and conferences. Founded in 2008 by Don Hales and Neil Skihel, the company's core mission centers on honoring and celebrating exceptional achievements in customer and employee experience, but also in overall business excellence across diverse sectors. In addition, their aim is to showcase best practices, innovations, and achievements that contribute positively to these areas, ultimately inspiring other organizations to improve their own customer experience, employee engagement strategies, and overall business success. To find out more about Awards International and how to register your interest in their awards programs, check their website www.awardsinternational.com.